Well, hey there, Mama, and welcome back to the Moms Overcoming Overwhelm podcast, episode number 130. I'm Emily McDermott, and I'm here beside you on this journey as we work together to declutter your home, head, and heart. I'm very excited to introduce another return guest to the podcast, Desirae Endres, who you might know from the podcast Minimalish. And Desirae was on the show way back in episode 29, all about embracing kids' messes without going crazy. And she is a wife, mom to two girls, and as I mentioned, the host of the Minimalish podcast, where she talks all about things realistic minimalism, motherhood, and intentional living. And we talk a little bit about her story and her background. She, in 2018, her and her husband set out to live with less clutter in their home. And what I love about Desirae is she has a very realistic approach to minimalism. And today we're talking all about how to make minimalism your own and what she sees are the 4 pillars of minimalism. So I know you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So what do you say? Grab that notebook and pen and let's dive into this chat with Desirae Endres. Hey there, Mama. Are you tired of all the stuff crowding your home, calendar, and mind? Do you wish you could say goodbye to the endless to-do list running around in your head? Want to declutter but don't know where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to Moms Overcoming Overwhelm, where you will find proven and practical solutions to declutter your home, head, and heart. Hi, I'm Emily, a wife, boy mom, and simplicity seeker. I struggled to get pregnant and felt overwhelmed until I discovered decluttering could create the physical and emotional space I needed to become a mom. Now, 2 kids later, I've transformed my life in motherhood by developing simple systems around decluttering, capsule wardrobes, kid stuff, cleaning and tidying, meal planning, time management, and more, and I can't wait to share them with you. If you're ready to reclaim the time and energy you crave, be present with your kids, and finally enjoy the life and motherhood you so deserve, let's kick overwhelm to the curb, shall we? Grab your lukewarm coffee, your notebook and pen, and clear off some counter space. Let's do this. Well, hi, Desirae. Thank you so much for coming back to the Moms Overcoming Overwhelm podcast. I am thrilled that you are here today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be back. And I love just seeing, I think I was here pretty early on, right? So I've loved seeing like all the ways that you've been growing and everything you've been doing. You do great things on the podcast. So I love it.
Yeah, you were back here at episode 29. I had to look it up about embracing kids' messes without going crazy, which, funny thing, we are recording this right after, literally the day after the spring break ended for our schools. And I felt like I really needed that episode then because it's all about like going crazy because my house is overrun by Lego sets right now.
Yeah.
So I would love it if you could kind of, I know if people listen to that episode, they got to know you a little bit, but kind of reintroduce yourself a bit about you and your family and kind of how you serve moms, if you don't mind sharing that.
Yeah, sure. So I am a mom to 2. I have an almost 2-year-old in a couple of weeks and a 6-year-old. And I have been podcasting for over 6 years now at the Minimalish podcast. I'm also a former English teacher. And yeah, I just have been right now like staying at home with my youngest and podcasting and doing all things over on the minimalish side of things.
Yay. And you also have a book that came out recently. I know you have 2, but can you just real quick tell us a little bit about the book that you just got published?
Yeah, sure. Well, they are like book journal hybrid type things. The first one I is called Simple Morning Lists, and I self-published that one back in 20, I don't know, things run together now, 2019, I think. And that one used to have like some essays in it, but now those are kind of like attached to it. You can find them at a link. So that one's more so a journal, and that's a daily morning journal that takes you through 5 lists that you make every morning to just help get your day started in an intentional way. And then the newest one is a holiday themed journal, which might sound I'm not sure when this is going out, but it might sound like irrelevant, but it did go out around the holidays. So it'll be there in this next holiday season. And it's just really about making the holidays intentional and minimalish and defining what that looks like for you.
Awesome. Well, I will be sure to link both of those in the show notes. And I know that journaling and this idea of journaling, we're going to talk about it a little bit more in the episode. But I love how you have kind of created your own version of minimalism. Of course, your podcast name, Minimal-ish, because for those that aren't super familiar with minimalism, sometimes people can put these hard and fast rules and sort of boundaries around what they think minimalism is and isn't. And I always joke like minimalism doesn't mean you can own like 5 forks. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean you're going to have the minimalism police show up at your door and like knock and be like, ma'am, I saw you at Target yesterday and it didn't look like you were buying necessities, you know? I would love it if you could kind of tell us about how you define minimalism and how in your journey you were able to embrace minimalism as your own rather than feeling like what we might see on social media or with influencers or other moms, even, and kind of comparing our journeys to others, how you were really able to embrace this personal definition of minimalism.
Yeah. So I define minimalism, I kind of give it a simple definition in my head, just so that if I'm ever talking to someone about minimalism, they're like, what is that? It's really easy to define it. It's really easy to like understand what it actually is. And it's just for me, it is just living with less stuff so that we have more time to focus on the things that matter to us. And I think that second part of just like the purpose of it so that we have more time to focus on what matters is the most important part of it for anyone. But whenever I first started, and I think when a lot of people first start with something, it is really easy to focus on the first part of that definition that I have for myself. We can define it in lots of different ways, but the first part of that is just this idea of living with less. And we tend to focus a lot on that part because it is more tangible, I guess, of just like, oh, well, what could less stuff look like? And what exact amount of less stuff is less enough? And how deeply do I need to get rid of stuff? How much do I need to get rid of? How much do I need to keep? And so in the beginning, that was really what I focused on defining, even though I knew the purpose of it for me. Like I knew that I needed a why and I needed to have a reason for doing it. It was just easier to focus on that tangible part. And so I am a messy person and I am not it's not easy for me to like, especially physical space to organize things. And so even with less stuff, it was still I still had mess in my house and I would see other people's version of minimalism that they put out online and comparing myself to that, I realized that like I will never be that. So I almost was like, okay, maybe this was like a good lifestyle change for the moment. This is a good lifestyle change to help me get rid of some stuff that I needed to get rid of. But now, like, I'm feeling imposter syndrome. And at that point, I had already started a podcast. So I'm like, maybe I should just stop all of this. Like, this is not me. This doesn't work for me. And then I did stop the podcast for a little bit. It was at first, it was called the Minimalist Family Podcast. And we did stop for a while. And then I decided to start it back up because while I was stopped while I was on that break of the with the podcast, I started to realize like, okay, this lifestyle change, there are so many benefits to it. And I started to think about like what are the benefits for me in my life? Like what aspects of minimalism matter most to me because there are so many aspects of it. I mean, you go from like under the minimalism umbrella, there are people doing like zero waste. There are people doing like lots of thrifting and all secondhand and like the sustainability aspect of minimalism, which is really great. But that can feel like a lot to think about all of that on top of just like if you're feeling like your house is really cluttered and you need to deal with that. So I just kind of thought about like, what are the benefits? What am I seeing? What are the benefits that I'm seeing? And how do I move forward with keeping this as a lifestyle change and focusing on these benefits and focusing on this aspect of it and just making it personalized to myself. And so that's kind of how I talk about it now as well. And I do invite all the aspects of minimalism onto my podcast, but I'm not trying to be all of them because they don't all work for me. That would be way too much for me to handle.
Yeah, that is so helpful. And I actually help support other female podcasters. And so we have these podcasts, all these different things. And one of them, he is focusing on homesteading. And I feel like homesteading is one of these other things where it's like, oh my gosh, does this mean I have to have all my animals and like bake sourdough every day? Like all this stuff that seems very like unattainable. But then you can just kind of implement some of these simple things, which might be that you grow herbs rather than get them at the grocery store, and that might be
Yeah.
like step. And so I love also how you've talked about minimalism, as a tool. So instead of thinking it has to be this huge sweeping lifestyle change that kind of like upends everything in your life, that you're using it as a tool to be able to really enjoy those benefits that you spoke of. And I wanted to dive into these 4 pillars of minimalism that you use kind of as part of this tool to understand minimalism a little bit more and maybe talk about each of them, how you have been impacted in your journey by them, and then maybe how we can make it our own as like being able to make these different aspects something personalized to our journey and the benefits that we want to experience. So the first pillar, like you have talked about, where most of us start and where I started, was the live with less stuff. I'm going to give away the first one. I'll let you do the other ones, but can you talk about, for your journey a little bit, like why that was sort of the first step, and then also how that might look for somebody else as well?
Yeah. So whenever I learned about minimalism, and when I think most people do learn about minimalism, that is what the, I guess, the outward, appeal of minimalism is having less stuff. And so I learned about it through the minimalism documentary. I'm sure I heard the word before that, but that's where my interest really got piqued. And seeing a couple of things like really piqued my interest. One, just decluttering. I think it was Courtney Carver. I know it wasn't Courtney Cox, but I kept wanting to say that.
Maybe Courtney Cox declutters too. We don't
Who
know.
knows? She probably does. Or someone helps her with it. Someone does it for her. But Courtney Carver, with her like 3 and 30 wardrobe challenge, and that was of interest to me. And then there was someone on there that talked about living in a tiny home as well, and that piqued my interest, although not quite to that extreme. But a couple of things like started just changing my mindset as I looked at those two stories specifically. And Joshua Becker's on there as well, and he talked about minimalism with a family. And so that perspective, I realized like, okay, I had a baby at the time, just one little one, and it's like, okay, this is possible with kids, and I have way too much stuff for this one baby. And I started realizing like I don't need a lot of stuff to be happy. She definitely doesn't need this much stuff to be happy. Like she doesn't even barely play with it. She was like probably 6 to 9 months, somewhere in that range at the time, and she would just like dump stuff out of a bin and then, crawl away from it. So really just thinking of those 3 stories really resonated with me. And so we decluttered our stuff, and that was impactful for us. Me, especially because of, like I said, being a messy person that just like has trouble managing stuff. Having less of it makes it easier to manage. And then as I've added another child, and the first child got much older and, has her opinions of what stuff she wants to have, it's so much easier to manage stuff. And it's still not perfect, that's for sure. Like there's still mess. And your picture of like the end of spring break at your house yesterday was the day like my 6-year-old just piled the couch cushions on top of each other. She found like all the comforters in the house, and I was working out, my husband was with her. I don't know how this happened, but she just gathered it all into one pile, and it just like stayed there all day. And then the littlest one dumped plastic eggs, from Easter everywhere because we hadn't gotten those back to their hiding place for next year. And it was just a mess. But like having less of the daily mess that's just there all the time because it's just clutter that I haven't dealt with yet, it makes it so much easier to manage those messes that pop up just because of living life with people. So those were really impactful for us. And another thing that was a huge impact in the beginning is that idea of downsizing. I There was a lot in the documentary about downsizing and like just the space that we have and the space that we use that was really interesting to me because at the time I knew I was a new mom and I wanted to stay home for a little bit with her, and I knew the house we were in, it had 4 bedrooms and like we really didn't need all that space and we couldn't afford that house on one income. And so when we did eventually move, we decided to move to a 2 bedroom house and it was pretty small. And since then, we have moved to a bigger house, but not intentionally. It just was like what was available and it was actually lower price just because it was in the location it was in. So it worked out. But it's interesting that like having a bigger space, it's so much easier to add clutter. So I'm still like, I love a small space, even though I live in a little bit bigger of a space than I have before. But yeah, those were the biggest impacts for me when it comes to living with less stuff.
Yeah, I'm in a townhome, and sometimes we talk about moving back kind of in the area you're from, Pittsburgh area, where our
Yeah.
family. And I know that we could afford a bigger house, but then I'm like, I don't want a bigger house.
Yeah.
This is enough that I can manage. And that is always what I shout from the rooftops about. Like, it's not, the square footage of your home, it's your ability to manage like what is in the home. So yeah, that is really helpful. And that documentary, and I'll link it in the show notes, was really impactful for me. Also, like you said, it was showing just different aspects. And then you can kind of see like what might work for you. And maybe it isn't living in a tiny house, but maybe it is recognizing that, oh, I can maybe decide to downsize rather than doing what everyone else is doing and trying to get the bigger house, right? Which is always like our culture is like, okay, you maybe get married, then you have kids, and then you're getting the bigger and bigger and bigger house. It's not as normal to be like, oh, I'm married and have a kid, and now we're going to look for a smaller house.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like adding stuff to your life or upsizing your house and getting the more expensive vehicle, like those are status symbols. Material possessions can be status symbols like in our culture. And I think that just the mindset shift of living with less and not putting our value and our identity in our possessions, that's like such a huge mindset shift with that first pillar of decluttering your stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, talking about what we value, can we let's move into pillar number two, if you could tell us about that, please.
Yeah. So the second pillar is to know your values and align your days to them. And I think as we kind of like strip away stuff and as it gets easier to let go of stuff, I found in my journey that it's easier to just like let go of things in general. And it's as you're asking these questions of like physical things of is this actually valuable to me? Is this just taking up space and it is taking up space that could be used for something else? Is this taking up my time and it's taking up my time that I could be used for something else? Those questions apply to like our days. And for me, I think this one is the most impactful and it's the one that I'm constantly really thinking about is how do I live more intentionally from the day to day? Like on a small scale, what am I doing with my time in my day? And so when you're thinking about living intentionally, which for me is a huge aspect of minimalism, it's that second half of the definition of having time for what matters. That having time for what matters does not just come from decluttering our stuff, it comes from decluttering our days. So it's important to know our values, I think, and that's why it's part of it to know how to make our days more intentional. So, what matters to you, and really thinking about like what are maybe the five at the very most things that matter most to you, and how are you currently spending your time in your days? I like to, if I'm like really getting into the nitty gritty of this pillar, I like to say, like, really track your time throughout your day, or even brainstorm, like, what ideally would your day look like? And then go in and look at, what your day actually looks like, how you're actually spending your time. And then it's not about overhauling completely. Like, you can't always quit your job if it seems like it's the thing that is stressing you out and taking up your time. I know that you can't always just like up and quit your job, but it's taking baby steps. It's saying, like, oh, wow, okay, my job is really not aligned to my values because it's taking up a lot of time away from my family. I would rather have a job that's more flexible, but I can't up and quit. Okay, now I'm going to take small steps towards looking for something else. Or maybe it's something that can't, is more in your power, uh, something that's easier to overhaul, or at least like it's something you can take bigger steps towards. Like scrolling on your phone is a huge one for so many of us, that takes up a lot of our time. And you can ask yourself, like, is the time I'm spending on social media, is it aligned to my values and what I want to be spending my time with? So those are kind of two things that I have had to reevaluate. I've changed my job like so many times in the past. Well, it feels like more times to me, but for someone else, probably like that's not that many. But I left teaching. I was home for a few years. I went back to a more flexible teaching job, and now I'm back home for a couple of years. And it's just these things that I felt in the past, felt like success is for me as a teacher, success would be continuing on a path of a teaching career and like staying in one place and being there for 25 plus years and then retiring. Like that's the successful path of a teacher. Or if you want to do administration and climb that ladder. But I realized that, like, for me, that wouldn't feel like success because I so desperately wanted a job where I didn't feel so stressed out while I was, my kids were young, and teaching wasn't that for me. So I pivoted a lot over the years, and I will continue to do so because to me, like, this pillar has given me so much freedom to let go of those like societal definitions of success that would rule my day if I let them.
I love that. I love one of the things when I think about you, I think about the concept of you can always change your mind.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes we feel like, okay, well, I'm on this path and this is kind of the trajectory and like this is the way I'm going. But you can decide, well, you know what, this isn't really aligning with what I need in this season. And so I can shift in this season and that's okay. And when you were talking about scrolling, I was thinking of kind of like these domino kind of habits where if you change one thing, it has that ripple effect, that domino effect on other things. And I yesterday just went through and unfollowed probably 75% of whoever I was following on Facebook. I'm like, wait, who's this random high school person? I don't even know. And so
Yeah.
that was kind of for me, like that cleanup. I was like, I know that I was engaging in a lot of unhealthy scrolling during spring break, and I want to change that. That's not in line with my values. So that is going to make me focus better, to not compare myself. Like there's so many other secondary benefits of making that particular change. And speaking of comparison, which I do quite a bit, and we've been talking a lot on the podcast lately about decluttering unrealistic expectations of ourselves as women, as moms, the should statements, all of this. Can you tell us a little bit about this third pillar about decluttering our mind and kind of how that has looked for you as far as some of the practices that you use for that?
Yeah, I think, the declutter your mind, pillar 3, it goes hand in hand with the second pillar, really, because once you know your values, the declutter your mind aspect, the most like regular habit for me that's helpful is to do some journaling or just like center yourself in the morning around those values, kind of those daily reminders of like, this is what's important to me. And so, like, some things that help is gratitude, like a daily gratitude practice. I also, like, in the simple morning list journal, one of the lists is a surrender list, and it's really just like things to let go of. And so it's looking more so, instead of like a decluttering list of what you need to get rid of, it's looking at like what are the things on my mind that I need to let go of, whether it's something that just like you're anxious about. I've been like dealing with some anxieties lately around a family member's health. And so, like, something like that, I can put on that list of just reminding myself that there's nothing I can do. Like, my anxiety around it isn't going to help the situation. It's not helping anything. Or it can be things like comparison, or, something you are frustrated about at work, or like it can get so deep into like a relationship you need to reconcile. I don't know, like any of those things can maybe pop up on that list, but it's just looking at like what are the things that are weighing you down in your mind, and then looking at as well the just like the aspect of everyday mental load. That's the word I was looking for, like the mental load of every day, like just as something as simple as a brain dump, or something like some kind of form of planning that's going to work for you is a great way to declutter your mind. I know for me, if I have like all these things on my mind that I need to do, I don't even know where to start. So I have to have just like a master list of what needs done that week. And that helps me declutter my mind.
Yeah, me too. I always think of David Allen saying, there's no reason to have the same thought twice unless you like having that thought.
Yeah.
I always remember that. I'm like, oh, write it down, write it down, write it down, because that's the only way I can stay sane. And especially because we have all these inputs coming in from kids,
Mm.
from others that are demanding things from us, let alone what's kind of going on in our own brain. So that's really helpful. Can you share the fourth pillar with us?
Yeah. So the fourth pillar is to move towards contentment. And I think that that is like the overall goal for me of minimalism is to live more content and not feel like I always need to add something like to my life, whether it's a physical thing or, that kind of that thought that is often in our heads of like, I'll be happy when, like, I'll be happy when this happens. I'll be happy when I'm in the next bigger house. I'll be happy when I'm here or there. I have a friend who's like has been looking for a house for years. And one thing I told her the other day, she sent a house and she's like, it's smaller than we wanted and this and that. And I told her, I would say the house that we're in now is like, it's not our dream home by any means. It has a very small yard and I really miss our big yard. But I'm really happy here because there are so many like good things. We're near family and we are out of the situation that we were in our old house, which is a long story. But I kind of told her like, as from my experience of looking at houses, like you can make yourself content in a home, and that's so true of just like daily life of just, again, gratitude is a huge part of it. And I often just like try to stop and look around and be like, really savor. And that sounds so, I don't know, it sounds cliche. And I have to do it because I like tend towards the negative. And I want to preface by saying that because a lot of people say like, you're so positive, you're so, and like, you're so inspiring. I'm like, I say these things because I tell them to myself daily. Like I have to do these things for myself. And those are the things that help me with contentment because it's natural for me to be discontent. And so through minimalism, like through the other three pillars, this is like the fourth culminating pillar of just moving towards contentment.
I love that so much. In contentment, you just think about like having that peace and having the freedom and sort of not doing the comparison, not getting distracted by things. And there's just so much. I love that word. Content
Yeah.
like encompasses so much.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you sharing these pillars with us. I think it's great for us to think about again how we can apply minimalism to our own lives, what it might look like for our journey. And can you please share where everyone can connect with you?
Yeah, I am on the Minimalist podcast. Of course, you can kind of search that anywhere you listen. My website is DesiraeEndres.com. So that's kind of the hub for lots of things as well. And then minimalish.desiree on Instagram.
Wonderful. Well, I will link to all that in the show notes. So thank you again, Desirae, for coming and sharing your wisdom. I just know that you're blessing the mamas listening today. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much for having me again.
If you like today's podcast, here's what you can do. Just take 30 seconds to leave me a review. I know you're a busy mama. You're overwhelmed, in fact, but 30 seconds of your day makes such an impact. I'll be blessed by your words. They'll definitely make my day. And who knows, you might be entered for this month's giveaway. In Apple Podcasts, scroll down to write a review. Thanks so much for your time. I'm so grateful for you.